Mr. Ambassador, a couple of months ago, Philippine defense officials stated the need to review the Mutual Defense Treaty. I'm wondering about your view of this proposal in light of what's been happening in the South China Sea, and also, well, not just between the Philippines and China, but also between the U.S. and Russia. You've had several near incidents in the area as well.
So first of all, one of the reasons why I'm so proud to be serving as the U.S. ambassador to the Philippines is the alliance. Our alliance is very special, as you know, very long-standing. In fact, it's the oldest alliance relationship we have in the whole Asia-Pacific region. And my sense is that our alliance is continuing to grow and strengthen. That's a wonderful thing for both countries. With regards to some statements by Filipino officials that maybe it's time to look at some aspects of the Mutual Defense Treaty, look, we're always open to discussing how we can improve, how we can strengthen the alliance. And if it means looking at some aspects of the Mutual Defense Treaty to find out if there are, in fact, ways to strengthen our partnership, certainly we're open to it. I mean, you know, we have very close communication with the leaders of the Philippines Defense Establishment, you know, Secretary Lorenzana, the leaders of the Armed Forces of the Philippines. So we're continuing dialogue, and I think in the context of many of those dialogues, we do often talk about, you know, can we do something to strengthen certain aspects of the alliance? So, you know, I welcome any opportunity to look at whether it's the Mutual Defense Treaty or any other aspect of the alliance.
Beyond the alliance itself and the treaty, do you think the United States can be more unequivocal on its on what would trigger the Mutual Defense Treaty?
Yes.
I mean, in fairness, in the past months, there have been clearer statements, stronger statements from Washington. But do you think the United States can stand to be more unequivocal? Because I think that's really the question on this side.
Yeah, no, I know that many of our Filipino friends have asked that question, you know, just how strong or how deep is your commitment? In that regard, I think the Secretary of State Pompeo's visit to the Philippines was very important because, as you know, both in his meetings with President Duterte and in a press conference, the Secretary made it very clear that the United States is totally committed to the Mutual Defense Treaty, and that in the context of South China Sea, he made clear that because the South China Sea is part of the Pacific, under the treaty itself, any armed attack on Filipino vessels, Filipino forces, Filipino aircraft will trigger our obligations under the Mutual Defense Treaty. So I think that's about as clear as you can get, without getting into, you know, millions of possible hypothetical situations, because that's not really useful. But he was very clear.
Like a fishing vessel ramming a fishing vessel.
Well, I mean, I think the language in the treaty is any armed attack against Filipino forces, Filipino aircraft, and public vessels.
Yes.
But what about territories? That's not included there, is it?
It's not part of, well, I think that's sort of assumed that Filipino territories.
Because the testing ground now really is the West Philippine Sea. People are really trying to see whether you're going to come to the defense of the Philippines in case China, you know, pursues its very aggressive stance. So far, even the president has said that he really seriously doubts whether the U.S. will go to war to favor the Philippines in case it escalated into something like that. How do you assuage this doubt that the U.S. will really protect us or defend us in case that happens?
You know, all I can do is to restate what the Secretary of State made very clear here, which is that any armed attack on Filipino forces, Filipino aircraft, public vessels will trigger our obligations under the Mutual Defense Treaty.
Yes, but Mr. Ambassador, the clarity there does provide some assurance. On the other hand, it cuts both ways because the clarity also gives people pause and say, well, anything short of an armed attack, therefore, it still raises the question of, well, what about island building? What about landing military planes on islands, on man-made islands by China? That's not an armed attack, and yet this is the biggest cause of anxiety for Filipinos.
Yeah, no, so it gets a little complicated, but as you know, So we don't take a position on territorial disputes, right? We've never have, whether it's in the South China Sea or in the Japan Senkaku situation. That's a long-standing position of the United States. But at the same time, we are totally committed to the obligations under the Mutual Defense Treaty, and we will live up to those obligations. You know, I have confidence that our defense leaders in Washington and Manila understand what's at stake, and that when we encounter situations that will require our commitment to come to reality, I think we will deliver.
Well,
I'm quite confident.
Well, just for clarity, does armed attack include militias? Because that's what China has in the South China Sea. They're not really military. They're militias.
Any armed attack,
Okay.
I mean, I would take that to include government-sanctioned militias.